When the construction of our new home began, my husband lost his job. He said he'd at least work part-time to help pay half of the mortgage, but he couldn't find another job or even a part-time gig. When our new house was finally completed, he said something outrageous. "I'm giving this house as a wedding gift to my lovely niece. We can just buy another one. If you don't agree with me, let's get divorced right away." What? I thought. But I knew my husband's secret, so if that was his attitude, I was happy to divorce him. I accepted his proposal. My husband thought everything was going his way and had a smug look on his face. After quickly submitting the divorce papers, my husband started talking about the division of property. When I revealed that I knew his secret, his attitude changed drastically. With some backup from a certain person, his plan took an unexpected turn and led to a shocking situation. We had been married for 3 years. As we approached our 30s, we discussed whether to have kids. Giving birth requires a lot of energy, and I can't guarantee that I'll always be as healthy as I am now. I told my husband that if we were going to have kids, I wanted to have them before my mid-30s. At that point, I was fine with it if my husband thought it wasn't necessary to have kids. He said he wanted kids too, but added that our current place was too small for a family, suggesting we consider getting a new home. Raising a child costs a lot, and even if we managed to buy a house, we'd be looking at a mortgage of nearly 30 years. In 30 years, my husband would be in his mid-60s and likely retired. We didn't want to burden our child with our mortgage. My mother had raised me while working full-time and handling household chores. She worked diligently until her retirement, supporting my father and me. I always respected her for that and decided to balance work and home life like she did. I resolved to make the home ownership plan a reality while keeping our finances in mind. We chose a home builder and got our new home project on track. Fortunately, we had savings, so we decided to pay a large down payment to avoid future mortgage stress. Just when things were coming together, my husband's company went bankrupt. He didn't get any severance pay and was now unemployed. When I asked him if there had been any signs of the bankruptcy, he got angry and said that as a non-executive employee, he couldn't have known. One morning, when my husband went to work as usual, he found the office locked and a note on the door. The note stated that the company had gone bankrupt the previous day. It was a small company, and the CEO and other responsible parties had apparently fled overnight. There was no severance pay, and he wouldn't even get his last paycheck. Given the uncertain situation, I suggested we put our home purchase on hold, as it was too big a commitment. However, my husband insisted that we go ahead with the house construction since we had come this far. He strongly expressed his desire to find a new job immediately without being picky, so I decided to put the plan on hold. If he wasn't picky, he should be able to find a new job quickly. I planned to continue with our home project after he found re-employment. From the next day, he actively searched for jobs, visiting employment agencies and looking online. He even said he'd take on short-term gigs until he found a stable job and quickly found a temp job. Although it was through a temp agency with no guarantee of work. His actions and words about helping with the mortgage reassured me. My income was stable, so we wouldn't struggle even without his help. I decided to proceed with our home plan and build a new house. Up to this point, he might seem like a very sincere husband. But my husband had an obsession that bordered on abnormal. He had an older sister who had kids at a young age. Becoming an uncle at a young age, my husband adored his niece. Though they lived far away due to his sister's husband's job transfer, he sent expensive gifts and much more cash than usual for allowances. When he wanted to give his niece $2,000 as a holiday gift, I had to object, saying it was too much even for a beloved niece. When he sent gifts to his niece, he would tell me he spent money on her, but I never received any thank you notes from his sister, which left me feeling uneasy. At one point, even when we had unexpected expenses, he spent a lot on gifts for his niece without considering our household budget, making me question his judgment. After that, I was often astonished by his excessive affection for his niece. Now that he was unemployed, he didn't seem to spend savings on her, But he spent more time out of the house, supposedly job hunting. He left the house earlier and came home later than when he had a job. When I asked if employment agencies were open so late, he said he was attending seminars and networking. While his enthusiasm for job hunting was good, he became lax about the new house, leaving everything to me. My husband arrogantly insisted on joint ownership of the house but left all the paperwork to me. I gently suggested that he should show some interest in the house. He sighed, saying he was too tired from job hunting to help, implying he was making a great effort. I was exhausted from balancing work, the new house, and chores, so I avoided arguing with him. Later, I worried that he might claim I should pay the mortgage alone since I made all the decisions. When I brought up finalizing the payment details, he said he didn't want to touch his personal savings until he found a job. He claimed it was to avoid burdening me in the future, but I felt we should focus on the immediate situation. No matter how I explained, he refused to use his savings and suggested I cover the mortgage for now. I felt his suggestion was too convenient for him and different from our initial agreement. So, I told him that if I had to cover the mortgage for now, he should write an IOU, acknowledging that he was borrowing money from me. He refused to listen and became uncooperative, so I felt I needed to be firm with him. In response, my husband kept complaining, but when I pressed him about his job search, he seemed to realize it could cause more trouble, so he reluctantly agreed. We agreed that he would repay half the mortgage I covered once he found a job. He signed the agreement, and I securely stored it away from his view. Throughout the house construction, there were several instances where my husband broke our initial agreements. First, despite saying he would find a job quickly and not be picky, he hadn't secured re-employment as the new house neared completion. He also declined several temp jobs he had signed up for, making various excuses. I hated supporting a husband who wasn't making an effort, so I repeatedly urged him to find a job, but he kept dodging the issue, and our arguments became more frequent. In the meantime, our new house was finally completed, and we were ready to move in. But as things stand, it's difficult not only to move but even to continue living with my husband. Since he lost his job, I had gathered a lot of information. There were many things I wanted to confirm and discuss, including why he still hadn't found a job. As usual, I spoke to my husband as he was heading out to the employment agency. I asked him to spend the day with me because we needed to have a serious conversation. He tried to avoid it, saying that finding a job was his top priority and we could talk later. Even though it was unclear if he had even gotten any interviews so far, my husband said something outrageous when I insisted he listen to me for a day instead of going to the employment agency. A nagging woman isn't cute, you know? What? Actually, I have something to tell you too. I was going to wait, but now is as good a time as any since it's good news. My niece is getting married. So, I've decided to give her the new house as a wedding gift. We'll split the mortgage payments between us and keep paying it off. What? I had been exasperated by his excessive affection and financial irresponsibility toward his niece before, but giving her a house? How could he make such an important decision without consulting me? And this was the first I'd heard about his niece getting married. I argued with him, saying I hadn't heard anything about it and asking if he really thought he could make such decisions without telling me. In response, my husband said that if I didn't like it, we could get divorced. He was the one who suggested building a new house, yet he made no progress while still being unemployed. Despite this, he kept making vague promises about what he would do once he found a job. He talked a good game, but his actions didn't match his words. I was so exasperated by his behavior that I couldn't help but laugh. So, I wasn't surprised when he finally came up with the ridiculous idea of giving away a house. I'm sure it was related to that certain matter I knew about. Still, I was curious about how he would respond, so I fired off a series of questions. Are you serious? You're unemployed. Do you really think giving your niece a house with a mortgage is a good idea? Will she even appreciate that? How could you even think of paying off a 30-year mortgage and then giving the house to someone else? Giving someone a house with an unpaid mortgage as a gift is like giving them a burden. it's bad luck. Plus, we bought the house because we planned to have kids and grow our family. What about that? I pressed him. My husband responded confidently to my questions. He claimed he wouldn't be troubled by a divorce. Whenever I asked, he dangled the threat of divorce without explaining his thoughts. It was like talking to a different person, someone completely unreasonable. I had many things I wanted to discuss, but it became clear that my husband was more irrational than I had imagined. Since I had already considered bringing up divorce myself, I accepted his proposal. I told him I had conditions as well. He said he would agree to anything as long as I agreed to the divorce and leaving the house to him. I said I was fine with submitting the divorce papers first, but I wanted to finalize the division of property after the divorce was official. I also needed time to prepare to live alone and wanted to settle things once I was ready. My husband agreed, saying he would follow my terms if we could file for divorce immediately. The truth is, my claim about needing time to prepare for living alone was just a cover. I had something else I needed to do. I told him I needed time to prepare so I could buy some time without him finding out my plans. After the divorce, once I had finished everything I needed to do, I waited for the right moment to contact him. Eventually, perhaps out of frustration or because he had figured things out, he reached out to me first.
What's going on? Why is the new house up for sale? That house is for my niece, and it's our joint property. If you do this without my consent, I won't pay the mortgage.
He was furious, accusing me of selling our shared property without his permission. He yelled and refused to listen to my side of the story. Once he finished shouting, I calmly replied, "I knew you were trying to stick me with the payments. Did you really think the house was in both our names? You kept pushing for divorce, so I made sure everything was sorted out before agreeing to it." When my husband insisted on joint ownership, I had ensured the house was under both our names. However, I became suspicious when he started making excuses to leave the mortgage payments to me. I figured the day would come when he'd claim the house was his alone and stop paying, so I changed the ownership. Sure enough, as soon as the house was completed, he started acting strangely. I thought he might reveal his true intentions, but he stubbornly insisted that the house was for his niece, believing his real motives were still hidden from me. That's why I used all my savings to pay off the mortgage in full. In fact, my parents had sold a piece of land they inherited from my grandfather and given me the money to help with the payments when they learned we were building a house. My parents were the kind of people who always paid for big purchases in full, no matter how expensive. They believed in paying for things outright and had always warned against taking on loans. So, my parents provided financial assistance, advising me to pay for the house in full without taking out a loan. I was about to follow their advice, but just as I was going to talk about it, my husband lost his job. Knowing we had that kind of money would only make my husband even more irresponsible, so I kept it a secret. Also, if I paid the full amount, my husband probably wouldn't repay it considering his attitude. I felt that would be a betrayal of my parents' feelings, so I didn't tell them. When my husband found out that the house title was changed without his consent, he was furious. He even accused me of breaking the promise to keep the house. I said, "You said you'd keep the house." "Well, it's still here, isn't it? It's not demolished, and it's livable. Just because someone else owns it now doesn't mean you have the right to complain. If you really want it, you can buy it back. Since I'm the one who paid for the house in full, I can do whatever I want with it." Of course, I could have chosen to live in that house. But living in a house planned with my ex-husband felt like bad luck, so I didn't want to live there. My ex-husband, who had the house sold without his knowledge, complained about my reasoning, but then he started claiming that the money from the sale was part of our marital assets and that he had a right to it as part of the property division. He demanded a partial payment immediately, saying he would check the exact amount later. I asked him to meet so we could discuss not just that matter but other things as well. I arrived at the specified place first and waited for my husband. Soon, my husband arrived and seemed about to say something when he saw my face. But before he could speak, I showed him something that made him swallow his words and stare intently. What I showed him was the results of a private investigator's report on his conduct. The report contained evidence of his affair. There were blown-up photos of him kissing another woman on the street. There were also pictures of them dining at expensive restaurants and entering a hotel together. The report detailed that my husband had been job hunting for a few days after his unemployment, but according to people around his mistress, he met her around the time our house-building plans began in earnest and saw her almost every day. From the beginning, he made her sympathize with him by claiming he was single and considering marriage, but couldn't find a job due to the company's bankruptcy and the poor economy. He didn't just seek sympathy, he also made her support him by saying he was living on the edge with no savings. Since he was using the promise of marriage to demand money and gifts, my husband's behavior was no different from a con artist, and knowing that made me feel sick. It seemed he suddenly became assertive and started talking about divorce because he was fed up with everything. Whenever I brought up topics like the house loan or his uncooperative attitude, he probably got annoyed. His mistress was sympathetic and did whatever he said, so it seemed like he was planning to switch from me to her. The talk about giving the new house to his niece was also something he brought up to try to push me toward a divorce. I quickly realized he intended to use my refusal to give the house to his niece as a reason for the divorce. But my husband thought he had things under control, when in reality, he was just dancing in the palm of my hand. When my husband's behavior started getting suspicious, I hired a private investigator to look into his activities and found out about his affair. While I didn't expect him to use the excuse of giving the house to his niece, I had already decided to divorce him once I learned of the affair. I wanted to talk to him before moving into the new house, and this was the reason why. Initially, I planned to confront him about the affair and declare my intention to divorce, but seeing his strange behavior made me realize he was too unreasonable to communicate with. So, I decided to let him think he was getting his way while I planned my countermeasures behind the scenes. With all the evidence in hand, I confronted my husband.
I have solid proof of your affair. With this much evidence, you can't deny it. I'm going to sue you for the affair damages. You knew and kept quiet? Any woman who can stay silent while her husband cheats isn't worth much.
Love? You are the one betraying me, right? When he said something so outrageous, I couldn't help but laugh. I retorted quickly, and after a moment's hesitation, he claimed again that he had the right to a share of the assets. That's when I played my final card and called my father-in-law. I told him that my husband was demanding a share of the assets. My husband started yelling, asking why I needed to involve his father, but when I told him his father wanted to talk to him, he immediately stopped. I put the call on speaker and handed the phone to my husband, so he could hear every word his father said. My father-in-law scolded my husband, saying, "What's a grown man in his 30s doing? Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" He was furious about the affair and mocked my husband for demanding a share of the assets after causing the family to fall apart. My husband, who had always had a strained relationship with his father, couldn't defy him even now. My father-in-law despised dishonesty and particularly hated people who hurt or betrayed others. After my husband first brought up divorce, I immediately consulted with my father-in-law. I told him I'd try to resolve things on my own but asked for his help if it came to it. He supported me, saying I should abandon a man who cheats and that he'd confront my husband himself if needed. But I had many things I wanted to say to my husband who had betrayed me. I feared that if my father-in-law got involved, my husband would just run away. So, I kept my father-in-law in the background for the time being. After the divorce, I wanted to buy time without my husband knowing to coordinate with my father-in-law. I also needed to sell the house without my husband finding out. Additionally, I wanted to clarify my husband's relationship with his niece, so I called my sister-in-law in front of my father-in-law. I asked her to put my niece on the phone and asked if she had ever received expensive gifts or large sums of money from my husband. My niece said she had never received anything from him that could be considered a gift. My sister-in-law also said that when my niece was young and we lived nearby, they had invited my husband to her birthday party, but he showed up empty-handed, without even a birthday present. The only thing he ever gave her was a cheap birthday card. Next, I asked about the marriage talk. She said she was seeing someone, but they hadn't even talked about marriage, and she found it strange where that story came from. She also said she never asked for a house and would find it a burden and inconvenience if offered one. Both my sister-in-law and father-in-law had never heard of my husband doting on his niece. So where did the money my husband claimed was for his niece go? My sister-in-law gave me valuable information about that. When my husband was 20, my father-in-law was away on a solo assignment, and he wasn't at the family home. Suddenly, the police called to say my husband had been caught in a raid on an illegal casino and was taken into custody. My father-in-law is a very strict man, and my husband was terrified of him finding out he'd been involved with the police. When my mother-in-law went to pick him up, my husband reportedly begged her to keep it a secret from his father. In exchange for not reporting it to my father-in-law, she demanded he confess everything, and she found out he had been stealing valuables from the family storehouse to fund his gambling addiction. Although he promised to stop, she said it seemed pathological and doubted he could quit. When my father-in-law heard this, he checked the storehouse inventory and confirmed that several items were indeed missing. With my husband's past laid bare, my father-in-law confronted him.
"You're still gambling, aren't you, using your niece as an excuse? A jobless man gambling, how disgraceful. The division of assets isn't to fund your gambling."
My father-in-law then told my husband to return home, saying he would straighten him out. Unable to defy his father, my husband turned pale and admitted he didn't need the asset division. Afterward, through the lawyer my father-in-law arranged, I received formal documents stating my husband had relinquished his claim to the shared assets, and I gained full ownership. Thanks to my father-in-law's consideration, I received the demands from my husband. At first, I honestly felt resentment toward the mistress. However, during the investigation into my husband's behavior, I also requested an investigation into her, which changed my feelings toward her. The mistress believed my husband was single and struggling financially, and despite her own tight situation, she gave him money. I realized she was just another victim, manipulated by him. Even though she had been deceived, she tearfully apologized for breaking up my family. She even tried to offer me what little money she had as compensation, though she acknowledged it wasn't much. I assured her that her feelings were enough and didn't take the money. I also told her that since she was a victim of my husband, she could probably claim the demands. I explained that demanding money and gifts while dangling the prospect of marriage is fraud, and she could seek repayment for what she had given him. She took action immediately. She confronted my husband at my father-in-law's house, accusing him of deceiving her with the promise of marriage. This enraged my father-in-law, who insisted she file a police report and demanded that my husband turn himself in right away. Terrified of the police, my husband begged for mercy, promising to repay all the money he had taken from her. My husband's meager savings were entirely used to pay money and restitution to his mistress, leaving him broke. Recently retired, my father-in-law had plenty of time to keep a strict watch over my husband. He monitored him even when he went to the bathroom, timing everything down to the minute. He drove him to the job center daily, urging him to find a job quickly. Unable to endure this prison-like environment, my husband fled while my father-in-law was sleeping. However, he left without any money, so he couldn't bear the hunger and returned to my father-in-law's house within 2 days. My father-in-law, disappointed by my husband's lack of resolve, kicked him out and severed all ties. Penniless and desperate, my husband snuck into the family storehouse, attempting to steal valuable antiques as he had before. But my father-in-law, aware of his past theft, had secured the storehouse with surveillance cameras and a contract with a security company. This led to an immediate report to the police, marking my husband's second encounter with the law. This time, his mother, who might have helped, was no longer alive, and his sister was angry about him using her daughter and refused to help. My father-in-law refused to bail him out, saying he needed to toughen up in jail. Naturally, I also declined, saying I was not involved. Now that the house was sold, and I had the money, I thought I might invest in refreshing my spirit. I rented the penthouse apartment I had always wanted to live in, and from there, I planned to enjoy the view and some good food, taking a moment to appreciate myself for enduring those years with my husband.
You miscarried because you weren't careful enough. Christina, haven't you gotten pregnant again since then?
I'm sorry. Blamed by Michael and my mother-in-law, I spent my days in a confined world. I never thought I'd be blamed alone for the miscarriage and not having a child afterward. My heart was completely worn down by this marriage. Then 7 years passed. I miraculously became pregnant. I thought I would never have children again. It was like a bolt from the blue. Michael, who was overjoyed, changed his tune.
Really? Awesome.
Without changing my expression, I calmly said, I want a divorce. What? Shocked, Michael and my mother-in-law faced me as I shouted,
I know all about what Michael has been doing. Stop making a fool of me.
What Michael had done was unforgivable. My anger blazed unceasingly, burning ever higher. My name is Christina King, 29 years old. I married Michael, my classmate from vocational school, 8 years ago, at 21. We still don't have kids. Currently, I live with Michael, his parents, and my younger sister Marilyn, a high school student. That's 5 of us. The reason for this living arrangement goes back to when I entered vocational school. I've always loved baking. So, after high school, I enrolled in a pastry chef school. Michael, my husband, was a classmate. We got along very well and started dating soon. College life was so much fun. Just before graduation, my parents died in an accident. It was so sudden, I was engulfed in grief. But I couldn't just cry forever. I had my younger sister Marilyn. She was still in elementary school. I had a job lined up at a famous bakery, but thinking about living expenses and Marilyn's tuition weighed heavily on me. The insurance money from my parents' accident had been used up on medical expenses for my sick grandparents. Could I support Marilyn on my starting salary? When I was feeling anxious, Michael was the one who offered me a lifeline. Let's get married and move to the countryside together, with your sister too, he said. Michael was the heir to a traditional confectionery store. He planned to take over the family business after graduation. I intended to marry Christina sooner or later, it just happened sooner than planned. He assured me that once we were married, his family could help with Marilyn's tuition and living expenses. Of course, I had my doubts about accepting such an offer so easily. But Michael firmly said, Christina, you're practically family already, it's only natural to help each other out. His words were so comforting, I cried. I declined my job offer and became part of the Michaels family. Michael's family lived in the countryside. The traditional confectionery shop run by my in-laws, King, is a long-established business dating back 140 years. In the local community, it was a beloved shop known to everyone. My in-laws welcomed me and Marilyn warmly. I felt safe with them. They even promised to support Marilyn's education and living costs. I remember feeling very relieved. But looking back now, I can only think I was ignorant of the world. I had been thinking naively. I had no idea that marrying into this family would change my fate so dramatically. After marrying Michael, I worked at the confectionery daily. Mostly, I helped my mother-in-law with ordering supplies and managing expenses. Only my father-in-law and Michael actually made the confections. During busy times, some male part-timers from a confectionery school would come to help. It's not that I'm dissatisfied with my current job. But I graduated from a patisserie school. Yet, I haven't made a single confection. I want to work in the kitchen too. Even just to help with preparations. When I tell Michael this, he just says, well, maybe someday, avoiding a clear answer. I felt a bit frustrated, but I had no choice but to comply. As time went on, I got pregnant. 4 months in, we found out it was a boy. Michael and my in-laws were overjoyed. I was happy too. One day, when I was feeling uneasy, I started experiencing stomach pains from the morning. I had a bad feeling about it. I rushed to the nearby OBGYN. The doctor, who had been taking care of the King family, was recommended to me by my mother-in-law, and I had been visiting here. The elderly doctor began with, "I'm sorry to say." Then slowly, he announced, "You've had a miscarriage." My mind went blank. Stunned, I underwent the necessary procedures and returned home. Could there be anything more heartbreaking? When Michael asked, "How did it go?" I reported back to him through tears. That's when Michael's attitude changed. "What? You had a miscarriage? Why?" "I don't know. There can be many reasons for a miscarriage, they couldn't pinpoint one." "What? Isn't it because you weren't careful enough?" I was shocked by Michael's angry response. I thought. I was expecting comfort, but his reaction was unexpected. I couldn't believe what he said, and as I stood there dumbfounded. My mother-in-law also arrived upon hearing the commotion. "That's right, Christina. It's a shame, expected a boy, and you miscarried. You've let us down." "I didn't. Don't you know? You're supposed to bear a male heir for the King family. If you can't do that, you have no place here." My mother-in-law said this with a terrifying look and returned to her room. I never expected to be spoken to like this. The shock of the miscarriage and the harsh words left me stunned. It took me a long time to recover. Not a single word of sympathy from Michael or my mother-in-law. Instead, they hurled even more bitter words at me. "Geez, how long are you going to keep that gloomy face? Just forget about it already. If you have time to be down, start thinking about the next child. Make sure a safe delivery of a boy this time." My father-in-law was silent, but it was clear he agreed with them. Their looks towards me became harsher. After the miscarriage, I felt like I was walking on pins and needles in this house. It wasn't my fault I miscarried. The cause was unknown. I explained this over and over, but they insisted it was due to my poor health or behavior. I couldn't believe it. In this day and age, to think such people still exist. Sure, for self-employed families, having an heir might be important. But the King family's obsession was bizarre. I think the gender of the child shouldn't matter, but Michael and his parents were desperate for a boy. Scarily so. However, the real horror was yet to come. After that, I couldn't get pregnant for a while. Each time, Michael and his parents grew colder. "How many months has it been since then, and you're still not pregnant?" "I'm sorry." I was saddened by my mother-in-law's heartless words. She had been so kind at first, but now she had completely changed, a total 180. Michael was the same. He joined in belittling me. A boy or a girl, it should be a precious child. Michael always said, "Make sure you give birth to a boy." He said it was for the sake of the King family's legacy, but it's absurd in this day and age to insist that the heir has to be a boy. That's what I think, but under their cold stares, I often felt down. I have to have a boy. I researched infertility. It can be caused by men too, not just women. With that in mind, I suggested that Michael should also visit the OBGYN with me. But he opposed it fiercely. "Why should I go to an OBGYN? It's your fault we can't have kids." Michael and his parents seemed to think it was my fault. Disappointed, I fell back into a gloomy routine. The only time I felt at peace was when I was with Marilyn. With no parents, I'm practically a parent to her. After work, I'd listen to her school stories every day. Sometimes I'd help her with homework or play with her. Marilyn always looked up to me, calling me big sister. She came to a strange land with me, never complained, and tried her best to adapt. Marilyn was my emotional support. On the other hand, my in-laws' attitude remained the same. I had suggested infertility treatments like in vitro fertilization, but they just gave me suspicious looks. To get pregnant through such a mechanical method is unacceptable. It must be a natural pregnancy, no less. That's my mother-in-law's catchphrase. The family that runs the traditional shop, which had been passed down through generations for a long time, but the people of the King family had outdated ways of thinking. I sighed. It's too unfair to blame me alone for not having a child. I even consulted with the OBGYN. But the doctor, who's been with the King family for a long time, shared a similar view to my mother-in-law. We are strictly aiming for natural conception. We don't do in vitro fertilization, so you'll have to go to a city hospital for that. The city hospitals are too far to realistically go from here. I'm at a dead end. Unexpected stress started affecting my body. I began to experience irregular menstrual cycles, making it even harder to conceive. Then, one day it happened. I was about to go to sleep and looked at the clock. It was 11 p.m. Michael must be coming home late again. A few times a week, he comes home late. Because of preparations for the next day. I was told to go to bed first, so I had already gone to my bedroom. That night, I went to bed early. But for some reason, I couldn't fall asleep. I got up to drink some water. And passed by the living room. That's when I heard it. Michael and my mother-in-law's voices. They were back. I was about to say something, but I stopped in my tracks. What they were talking about was unimaginable. You're late. Can't help it, she wouldn't give it back. She kept asking when I'd leave my wife. I told her I'd think about it if she had a boy. Just a routine task for me to plant my seed in other women, but they take it seriously, annoying really. I had hopes when she got pregnant last time. A girl was a disappointment. Well, if it doesn't work out, we'll look for someone else. Yeah. The Kings need a boy, not a girl. And since she miscarried the boy, and hasn't been pregnant since. If she gives birth to a boy, you should leave Christina. Of course. I couldn't understand what they were talking about. It seemed from the conversation that Michael was cheating. And he was nonchalantly talking about his mistress being pregnant with a girl. I felt my legs shaking. Is this a dream? They both wanted a boy. To the extent of cheating, or rather, treating it like a task. I was so shocked, I had to leave the spot. They were secretly trying to have a child with another woman, behind my back. Both kept saying it was for the King family, but that's just an affair. Unbelievable. Do they want a boy that badly? That's when it hit me. The part-time workers dispatched from the confectionery school were always boys. There should be many women aspiring to be pastry chefs, yet they never hire women. I casually decided to ask. Why do they only accept men? Of course, I couldn't ask anyone from the King family directly. I decided to ask a boy who helps out at the shop. A student from the confectionery school who works the most during his long holidays. Hey, only boys come to help out here, right? Don't girls like this place? I asked nonchalantly, and the boy answered straightforwardly. Not at all. There are plenty of girls in my class who want to work at the Kings. But the job listings at school are for males only. Really? Didn't you know? Oh, right, Christina, you're not originally from here. This shop doesn't allow women in the kitchen. The Kings are quite traditional, believe in customs and all. The boy seemed to regret speaking too much and clammed up. But I pressed on. What customs? Tell me. He reluctantly shared. The Kings had always been succeeded by men. A few generations back, there was a time when no male heir was born, and a woman had to work in the kitchen. But for some unknown reason, the taste and popularity declined, and the King's business suffered. They ended up in massive debt. However, a miracle boy was born later and took over, turning the business around. Since then, there's been a superstition in the King family that if women make confectionaries, the business will fail. That's why women are no longer allowed in the kitchen. Even the part-time help positions were exclusively for men. The locals seemed to know about the King family's customs through word of mouth. So that was it. I finally understood. Michael never let me work in the kitchen. His parents' abnormal desire for a male heir. That's why they turned cold towards me after I miscarried the boy. And then that night's conversation. desperately trying to have a boy with a woman who wasn't his wife. But isn't that an unethical act? Being unfaithful over some silly superstition. And it seemed like he planned to leave me if the mistress gave birth to a boy. What do they think of people? Treating women as mere tools for childbirth, I was trembling with anger. I wanted nothing more than to leave this house, to divorce. But there was Marilyn. Since I relied on the Kings for her tuition and living expenses, I couldn't divorce until she graduated high school. I had to endure until Marilyn's graduation. But just enduring wasn't enough. I began plotting my revenge against Michael and his parents. Time passed. Years went by, and I was now 29. I had a plan. For it, I needed to make the Kings as famous as possible. I started actively promoting the Kings on social media. Slowly, their popularity grew, and eventually, they became a nationally known store. Though an old establishment, the Kings had been only a local famous shop. Now, they were a household name, featured on TV and in magazines. Michael and my mother-in-law were happy with my work. They were still cold about not having a male child, but my success with social media and boosting the store's business had secured my place in the family. The plan was working. But I was hesitant to execute it. I owed the Kings one thing: they paid for Marilyn's tuition. But Marilyn was about to graduate. She was acquiring medical qualifications while in school. So, Marilyn had already secured a job as a medical office assistant at a small clinic. I'm glad you got the job offer. But you chose a hospital quite far away, huh? Marilyn answered with a somewhat somber expression. Yeah. I wanted to be far away from here. You mean? Sorry, sis. I'm grateful to the Kings for providing for my living expenses and high school tuition. But Marilyn hesitated. When I pressed her for more information, I learned something shocking. Apparently, Michael had tried to assault Marilyn. He said things like, "Christina can't have kids, so you have to fulfill the duty, or I'm paying for your tuition, so pay me back with your body." Thankfully, he was drunk at the time, and she managed to resist and avoid it, but the next day, he warned her, "Don't tell anyone about last night." I felt dizzy. Marilyn had kept quiet about it, considering my position. She had long known I was being blamed by them due to my infertility. Finally, when I graduate high school, we can get away from the Kings. You don't have to stay here and suffer because of me. I'm sorry for making you endure all this. Marilyn spoke through tears. No, I should apologize for putting you through this. If I had seen Michael's true nature earlier. I apologized to Marilyn, crying. Unforgivable. A fierce flame of anger rose within me. It was one thing for them to involve me, but to involve Marilyn too. The Kings used the fact that they were paying for tuition and living expenses to torment us. I had been thankful and grateful when they said they would take care of Marilyn. But now, it felt like they had said it just to tie me to the Kings. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to divorce immediately. And I had to carry out my plan. That's when I decided. But then, something unexpected happened. I couldn't believe it and asked the doctor repeatedly. I was pregnant. Ever since I found out about Michael's infidelity, being intimate with him was a torment. But if I refused, he would verbally abuse me. I had no choice but to comply. And for 7 years, stress had caused me to have irregular menstrual cycles. I thought I couldn't have children, but the irony was that the moment I decided to divorce, I got pregnant. But my decision remained unchanged. I resolved to announce my pregnancy. Michael was surprised, then delighted. He suddenly started praising me.
Wow, pregnant. That's great. What's the gender? Tell me quickly.
It's too early to know, it's still the beginning.
That's right. We can't be sure yet. It has to be a boy.
It seemed my mother-in-law had been listening to the conversation.
That's right. Let me know as soon as you find out.
They were as selfish as ever. Without changing my expression, I said calmly, "I want a divorce."
What?
Michael and my mother-in-law were shocked. I glared at them and let it all out.
I know Michael has been cheating for years. No matter how desperate you are to have a boy, it's not excusable. Stop making a fool of me. I have solid proof of your infidelity.
After that, I followed Michael when he came home late. He was indeed visiting another woman's house. She seemed to be a high school classmate of Michael's, who had always admired the prestigious King family. It must have been easy for Michael to seduce such a woman. I captured several photos of them together, looking intimate. When I showed the evidence, Michael was taken aback. But he quickly retorted, "What are you talking about? This isn't cheating. It's all because you couldn't give birth to a boy." I had no choice but to find another woman to preserve the Kings.
Really? And assaulting Marilyn was also unavoidable?
Well, that. Michael was at a loss for words. He must have felt guilty. But then my mother-in-law sighed. Her following words were horrifying. "Oh, what do you think we took your sister for? If you couldn't do it, we expected Marilyn to fulfill the duty. Anyone will do, as long as they can give birth to a boy. Being able to bear a male child is the only condition to stay in the King family. You worked hard on the social media promotion for us, maybe out of guilt for not having a child. Well, the store became famous because of it, and we appreciate that. But if you can't have a boy, you have no right to be here. Understand? Do these people have no human heart? They saw Marilyn as just a backup plan for me. All they care about is preserving the Kings."
I don't understand at all. Is the family so important that you'll hurt our hearts for it? Unbelievable. I can't stay in this absurd, nonsensical family any longer.
When I shouted, my mother-in-law made a bitter face. On the contrary, Michael snorted. "People outside the King family will never understand, Christina. That's all you were. If you want to divorce that much, fine. But," he said, "if it's a boy, he wants the child. He doesn't need a girl. How can he speak about his own child like this?" I never thought they could be so cold. They seemed like a family crazed with superstitions. I had no choice but to agree to these terms. In return, if the child is a girl, they have to promise never to involve themselves with me again. And so, I was finally able to divorce Michael. On the day I left the King family, I was packing my things. Marilyn had already moved to an apartment rented by her employer. It was too dangerous to stay in the King household any longer. While I was packing, Michael appeared. "Hey, isn't it time to find out the baby's gender? Go to the hospital quickly." Even at this time, he's worried about that. I despised him. But I wouldn't have to come here anymore. As a final goodbye, I went to the usual OBGYN. The elderly doctor quickly diagnosed, "It's a girl." Their faces, when I told them, were as if to say, "See, I knew it." They seemed to have completely lost interest in me. But I didn't care anymore. What these people think doesn't matter. I just wanted to leave the house as soon as possible. This long but short marriage was over. I felt relieved, as if a burden had been lifted. But there was still one last thing to do. I updated the King's social media account. And then I left the King house. Afterward, I stayed with Marilyn for a while. Just to be safe, I had informed her workplace that I would be living with her. The clinic director, knowing our situation of having no parents, readily agreed to let me stay. I was grateful for that. Then one day, my phone vibrated intensely several times. It was an angry call from Michael.
"Hey, Christina. What have you done?"
I knew the reason for his anger. The last post I updated detailed all the wrongdoings of the Kings. Their detestable customs and Michael's cheating habits. It spread everywhere, appearing in all sorts of media. As the Kings had become a famous store, they were featured prominently on TV news and the internet. They were being bashed relentlessly. If it had been just a small countryside confectionery, it wouldn't have blown up this big. I had ostensibly worked on social media to make the Kings more prosperous and famous. But my true intention was different. If you're to drop someone down from a mountain to the valley, it's better to make the fall from the highest, all at once. That's why I raised the Kings' fame. I successfully marketed them into a fame unusual for a countryside confectionery. When the time was ripe, I dropped the bomb. I thought we agreed you wouldn't involve yourself with me anymore. I retorted calmly. Yeah, but...
Stop being deluded by silly superstitions and treating people like fools with your outdated thinking. You're scum. Get bashed by the public and reflect on your ridiculous actions,
I said forcefully and hung up the phone. Shortly after, I went into labor. Fortunately, the clinic where Marilyn worked was an OB/GYN, so I had been attending there. And when I gave birth, it turned out to be a boy. The diagnosis of the country doctor was wrong. Apparently, it's possible to mistake a girl for a boy due to the position of the umbilical cord. But the doctor chuckled. Normally, it's clear enough not to make such a mistake. That doctor was the longtime physician for the King family. Perhaps after years of accommodating the Kings, his skills had dulled? I thought so, feeling fortunate amidst the misfortune. Anyway, if the Kings knew this child was a boy, they would do anything to take him back. I decided to keep silent. The baby's name is Ray. I chose a gender-neutral name for Ray, just in case the Kings ever found out. Ray grew up blissfully unaware of the adults' issues. Meanwhile, the scandal of the Kings didn't die down. Their thoroughly outdated custom of excluding women. Michael's numerous affairs, all excused by succession. These became perfect fodder for a scandal-hungry public. The rumors about the Kings were wildly and fiercely spread. Their reputation affected their business significantly. Their regular corporate customers from hotels and inns started canceling one after another. And the number of walk-in customers decreased. Gradually, their business went into debt. And eventually went bankrupt. Michael and his parents now apparently live in a small apartment. To cover the debts, they had to sell their house and store. Shocked by their downfall, Michael's parents fell ill. Michael now spends his days caring for them. And of course, being looked down upon by the locals, but also the relentless bashing on social media by strangers. Their names, photos, and even their address were exposed online. They've had endless troubles like graffiti on their house and stones thrown at them. To me, it was all their own doing. A family that believed in outdated superstitions and dehumanized people. No matter how famous their confectionery was, who would want to eat it knowing the people behind it lacked any compassion? Watching Ray play with his toys, I thought about it. Here was the boy the Kings had so desperately wanted. It's ironic that they went bankrupt after a boy was finally born. Captured by their own agenda, they lost sight of what it means to be human. Ray looked at me curiously. I decided to stop thinking about them. My revenge was over. It was time to use my time for myself. I made up my mind to pursue something I had been envisioning. As time passed, Ray entered elementary school. At the same time, I decided to rent an apartment. I couldn't keep staying in Marilyn's workplace apartment forever. Besides, I had received a substantial amount of money. I had become a pastry chef, making my own cakes. I rented a small shop to sell them. At first, they didn't sell much, but gradually they became popular through word of mouth. From there, corporate customers like nearby hotels started increasing, and my business got on track. That's why I was able to plan for renting an apartment to live with Ray. I was so happy to be working as a pastry chef again. After all, I hadn't made sweets for a while since marrying into the Kings. But when I made sweets again and saw Ray's smile, my old passion was rekindled. I wanted to make my own sweets again. To see the smiles of people eating them. That was my original starting point. I remembered that. Imagining the smiles of those who eat my creations. That gives me more strength than anything. I may not become as famous as the Kings, but that's okay. If I put my heart and soul into it, those who eat it, and everyone around them, will surely smile. Ray and Marilyn enjoy the sweets I make with delight. Just that alone makes my heart feel fulfilled. Despite everything, I am very happy now. I can say that from the bottom of my heart, and I can't help but smile. Women have it easy. Just claim menopause and you can skip work and chores. My husband's words boiled my blood. I couldn't hide my fury at what he said. The changes in my body started after I turned 50. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with menopause. These 2 years, I've suffered from dizziness, palpitations, hot flashes, and various other symptoms. Even though I'm receiving treatment at the hospital, it's only providing symptom relief and not leading to a complete cure. All this time, my husband, living under the same roof, showed no understanding of my illness. Dizziness? Tiredness? Back pain? That happens to everyone as they age. But to label it menopause and skip work to lie in bed all day? Lucky you. As I lay unable to stand due to dizziness, these were his words. He maliciously interpreted my doctor-advised leave as skiving off for a trivial illness. He repeatedly hurled insults and sarcasm at my incurable condition. But this day was different. He looked down on me with a disdainful laugh. If you have time to show off your illness, at least do some housework, like a wife should. I'm Linda, 52 years old. I live with my husband, David, 3 years my senior. We met through a mutual acquaintance in our late 20s and hit it off immediately. We smoothly continued our relationship and married in our early 30s. Though we occasionally had minor quarrels, David was kind. We both worked hard and lived a peaceful life. We don't have kids, but have supported each other well as a couple. However, a few years ago, our marriage underwent significant changes. I was working full-time but am currently on leave. Due to ill health. Specifically, I started experiencing menopause symptoms in my late 40s, leading to frequent health issues. Initially, it was irregular menstrual cycles and sudden hot flashes, but the symptoms worsened over time, including severe palpitations and sleepless nights. Eventually, it even affected my mental health, causing irritability and depression. Menopause brings about various symptoms over approximately 10 years around the time of menstruation stopping. I had heard about it, but experiencing it myself was far more challenging than I imagined. My symptoms were severe, and on family advice, I started hospital treatment, but there's no cure. The doctor said menopause involves diverse symptoms, so treatment is usually symptomatic. I'm using prescribed medicine and herbal remedies, but they only temporarily alleviate symptoms. It became hard to continue working, so I took leave when I turned 50, 2 years ago. My company allows up to 3 years of leave, and soon I'll have to decide whether to return or resign. I don't want to quit, but there's no sign of my symptoms easing, so resignation looms as a frustrating reality. If I quit, I dread what David might say. Initially, David was concerned and attentive when I fell ill with menopause. He wasn't one to take the lead in household chores, but he used to care when I was unwell. I thought he was kind, but as my health issues dragged on, he started to look at me with annoyance. When I discussed taking a temporary leave from work, he didn't take it well. I don't quite get what's up with your health, but do you really need to take leave? You're not just planning to slack off at home, right? He said, which shocked me. Men also experience menopause, but David, despite his chronic condition, has rarely been unwell. He's always maintained good health, so he seems to view my prolonged unwellness as laziness. No matter how much I explain my symptoms, he never shows understanding, always saying, "What's the solution then? If one method doesn't work, find another. Why keep saying you can't heal? Find a way to get better." Continuing to work in my current state is tough. When I expressed my desire to take a leave of absence until my health stabilizes, David, as expected, got furious. However, when I told him that not only my boss, but also my colleagues and juniors, urged me to take a break, he reluctantly agreed, albeit with dissatisfaction. I had resolved to work harder on household chores while I was off work, but there were times when I suddenly felt unwell and couldn't even get up. Standing up made me dizzy, and even sitting down, I couldn't stop sweating, possibly due to hot flashes. Still, when I tried to force myself to vacuum, I was mercilessly struck by severe back pain. I ended up taking medication and enduring the pain, only doing household chores when I felt a bit better. But David still didn't understand.
Aren't you better yet? What's the point of going to the doctor?
As expected, he gradually started treating me coldly. You know, don't be so dependent all the time. If you're on leave and staying at home all day, why don't you at least finish all the household chores during the day? You can't be feeling sick from morning till night. Coming home to no greeting, dinner that's just cut and cooked, what are you doing at home? David complained more than once when he returned from work. His exasperated sighs and attitude were shocking to me. Over the weekend, when I was feeling ill and lying down, he yelled, "How long are you going to sleep? At least do the laundry." David's sarcasm and complaints increased day by day, and there was no more consideration or concern from him. While his terrible attitude hurt me, I also grew increasingly anxious, wondering when my symptoms would heal or if they ever would. However, it was truly a blessing that my mother-in-law, Barbara, and my sister-in-law, Emily, who live in the same town, showed understanding of my condition and occasionally offered advice. Barbara is over 80 years old but has strong legs and is a very lively person who speaks her mind. My father-in-law has already passed away, and she lives with Emily and her husband. It was Barbara and Emily who first suggested I go to the hospital and even said I should consider taking a leave of absence if my condition was too severe. I'm really grateful to them, as both my parents have already passed away, for being so caring about my menopause symptoms. One day, David told me, for Mom's birthday, we're gonna have a dinner party at our place next weekend. In David's family, it's been a tradition since his childhood to have big dinner parties for family birthdays. Since marrying him, I've participated every year. Depending on the year, we've either gone out for meals or had a party at his parents' house, but this year, we decided to have Barbara's birthday celebration at our house. Naturally, I was in charge of the cooking. Barbara and Emily were supposed to come over in the evening, and Emily's husband couldn't make it due to work. "Make sure you're in good shape for the day," David said, glaring at me sharply.
I won't tolerate it if it's like last year.
"I understand," I replied, as I could only nod in front of David's assertive attitude. The thing is, last year, I felt ill during Barbara's birthday and missed the party at my in-laws. David seemed to think he was embarrassed by this. I still vividly remember being harshly scolded by him when he returned home, which was really tough and made me cry. So this time, I want to make sure I'm in good health for the dinner party, just as David said. However, if it were a condition that could be fixed just by wanting it, I wouldn't have been suffering for years. Hoping for even a slightly better condition, I started preparing little by little. Barbara is going to be 85 on her next birthday. Wanting to show my gratitude for all she has done for me, I vowed to put my best effort into cooking dinner for everyone that day. Since we're hosting the in-laws, there's a lot to do before the day, besides meal preparation. David is somewhat prideful, so I knew he wouldn't be satisfied unless the house was cleaned from corner to corner. I took a few days to thoroughly clean the house, all the while consulting my health. David never helps with the housework, just relaxing in the living room, but I've gotten used to that. I know some younger men nowadays do housework, but in David's generation, it's considered the wife's job. I never expected him to help, since he thinks I just loaf around the house all day. The day before the party, I finished shopping for the dinner menu and went to bed early, praying that I would wake up with mild symptoms. However, on the day of the dinner party, I woke up with terrible headaches and dizziness. When I tried to get up from bed, my vision became all wobbly, and I had to close my eyes. Then, I heard the intense pounding of my heart and was struck with a headache so severe it felt like my head was being hammered. It was one of the worst symptoms I've experienced recently. Nevertheless, I somehow managed to get out of bed, only to be greeted by David's loud TSK from above. Realizing I was unable to prepare breakfast, he grabbed only his wallet and phone and headed towards the door. He said indifferently, "I'm gonna grab some food. Then, because I feel sick being around you, I'll head over to Mom's place early. Make sure you have dinner ready and greet them properly," and he left the house. Indeed, David was supposed to pick up Barbara and Emily today, but showing up so early in the morning must have been inconvenient for them. His thoughtless words hurt, but I couldn't afford to stay upset. I just drank some jelly drink and took my medicine, lying in the living room until my symptoms settled. But even in the afternoon, my condition hardly improved. The medicine eased the headache, but I felt dizzy and unsteady whenever I tried to get up. I needed to start preparing dinner soon, but I couldn't get my body to move as I wanted. I stood in the kitchen for short periods, taking breaks in between, but time was running out. Feeling desperate, I tried calling David but couldn't reach him. I sent him a message, but he didn't reply. Eventually, it was 5 p.m., still not fully ready, and David returned home with Barbara and Emily. David entered the living room and looked at me sitting on the kitchen floor with a puzzled expression. "You didn't even greet Mom and the others when they arrived. Is dinner ready?" "It's not even set up," he said, and I was at a loss for words. I had made a salad with torn leafy vegetables and tomatoes. But beyond that, I had hardly prepared anything else. Anticipating another scolding, my heart raced with anxiety, and I struggled to breathe, but I decided to apologize and explain the truth. "David, I'm sorry. This is all I could manage. I'm really sorry, but could you order something tasty for the main dish?" "I'm sorry," I said. David's face turned red, and his demeanor changed drastically.
"Don't play the sick card now. This is an important dinner, and Mom was really looking forward to it. And you're just trying to embarrass me again like last year?"
David was furiously angry, scolding me harshly. "It's not like that. I'm not trying to play the sick card."
"You are. It's pathetic that at your age, you can't even manage your own health. You're inconveniencing us all because of your issues."
David didn't listen to me and continued to berate me.
"Then why didn't you answer the phone? I sent a message saying to eat out. I even sent another email 3 minutes ago asking you to order something. Why are you so insistent on eating at home when you do nothing?"
I exploded with pent-up frustration, shouting back loudly. Each word felt like a blow to the head with a metal bat. My vision was so blurred I could hardly see David's face properly. I couldn't hear anything over my own voice and pounding heart, and I was sweating profusely from the heat. The symptoms I had been managing with medication were now coming on strong, and I regretted it a bit, but I couldn't keep silent with David. When my vision finally cleared a bit and I caught sight of David, he was standing there with his mouth agape in a foolish expression. Then our eyes met, and he glared at me, pointing his finger strongly. "What's with that tone of voice? Pretending to be sick and hiding in the house, not doing any housework, you lazy." And then snapping back when pointed out, "You're the worst. Such a wife is unfit, I'm sick of supporting you. If you can't do the housework, then let's get a divorce," he yelled loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Despite my desperate pleas, nothing seemed to affect David. After years together, the fact that David could suggest divorce without hesitation made me feel so miserable that I was on the verge of tears. I had no choice but to agree to the divorce. Just as I was about to speak my agreement, I heard light footsteps. But David, in his rage, didn't seem to notice.
"What's the big deal about menopause anyway? Being tired, having stiff shoulders, that's normal for our age. Dizziness and headaches can't be that bad if you're taking medicine. You just want to lie in bed all day, don't you?"
Then someone tapped David on the shoulder from behind. It was Emily. With an anger I had never seen before, Emily swung her right hand as David turned around, striking him hard across the cheek. David, hit by a powerful right straight from a 60-year-old woman, fell to the floor, looking up at Emily, bewildered, not understanding what had happened.
"Hey, sis. Why did you hit me all of a sudden?"
As he rubbed his cheek, Puzzled, Emily glared at him sharply. And you, what's with that attitude? Have you been treating Linda like this for years? Deciding the severity of her illness without being a doctor and berating your wife, you should be ashamed, she yelled furiously. David, always trying to look good in front of his family, had never treated me so coldly. Even when he was berating me with disdain as I suffered from dizziness, he became caring about my health and made coffee himself as soon as Emily visited. I had confided in Barbara and Emily about my illness, but never about David's behavior. I was worried that speaking ill of David, their blood relative, might make them resent me. They might not believe me, as they hadn't seen how he treated me. Even if they did believe and sympathize, I feared how David would retaliate after they confronted him. But now, seeing Emily's actions, I wondered if my thinking had been wrong.
What do you mean? It's Mom's birthday party today, and I wanted her to enjoy it. But she ruined the dinner by not cooking, isn't she to blame?
David stood up and pointed at me, blaming me further. Then Barbara, who had come into the living room with Emily, glared at David.
Are you saying Linda ruined the dinner? That's just your opinion, isn't it? From what I've heard, Linda did as much as she could despite being in pain. When she realized she couldn't finish in time, she contacted you to change the location or order something. I don't want to be celebrated by someone who's unwell. And I'm certainly not happy to be celebrated by a son who only complains after pushing everything onto his sick wife.
Barbara spoke firmly to David. Then Emily asked, Did you just leave Linda alone when you knew she was unwell and come to our house?
Well, what could I have done? There are many things you could have done, like helping with housework or being considerate of her condition. Didn't I tell you to be more caring toward Linda when she first started feeling unwell? You just found it bothersome, didn't you?
David was at a loss for words, cornered by Emily's sharp comments. It seemed Emily had told David to be more attentive to me after I started feeling unwell, but David's behavior made it clear he hadn't heeded her words. Why do you and Mom always take her side? Menopause isn't even a real illness. Being tired or having palpitations, that happens to everyone as they age. Women who just want to be lazy call it an illness and make themselves out to be patients, David continued to justify himself. Emily sighed and began to explain.
You might not know this, David, but I also suffered from severe menopause symptoms. It's only recently that they've settled down, but they were so bad that I quit my job 10 years ago. You're saying that a disease that forced me to quit my job isn't real?
Hearing Emily's words, David froze, looking stunned. I had talked to Emily soon after my menopause symptoms started. She told me that she had suffered from menopause at the same age as me and had to temporarily stop working before eventually resigning. She didn't want to quit her job, but there was no sign of recovery, so after consulting with her family, she decided to prioritize her health. I knew Emily had quit her job around the age of 50, but I didn't know the reason until she told me. Thinking back, I realized that I hadn't seen her around that time. We mainly communicated by email because she couldn't meet due to her poor health. It was really tough back then. I thought it might never get better. But Michael, my husband, told me to quit my job and take it easy, Emily said. Michael, Emily's husband, is 5 years younger than her. His work involves irregular hours and night shifts, so he couldn't attend the dinner. I don't see him often, but I remember him as a kind man who always asks about my health. Emily, having such a compassionate husband, desperately appealed to David.
Linda isn't your servant, you know. Shouldn't a husband be more caring towards his wife?
I'm sorry, sis. I knew you were unwell back then, but I didn't realize it was for that reason. David replied, sounding defensive. But Emily's expression remained stern.
Right now, it's not me you should be apologizing to, but Linda,
Emily stated firmly. David, looking frustrated, turned his face towards me. David loves Emily, so he generally can't go against her words. Eventually, he seemed to give in. I'm sorry. Being scolded by my sister has been a wake-up call. "From now on, I'll help Linda and let's get along well," he said, looking into my eyes with a sincere tone. I thought he finally understood and felt relieved, thinking of forgiving him, when I heard, "Wait a moment." It was Barbara who intervened. Tired from standing, she approached the sofa with Emily's support and sat down next to me. Then, locking eyes with me, she said sternly, "Linda, don't take David's words seriously. You should get a divorce quickly." "What? What do you mean?" I asked, surprised. Barbara began to share a past experience. "Actually, I suffered from similar symptoms at your age. There was no name for it like menopause back then. From what you've told me, I think I also had menopause. I've mentioned this before, haven't I?" I nodded slightly at Barbara's words. When Barbara was about my age, menopause wasn't widely recognized. And there were no treatments, let alone understanding from others. Barbara chuckled with a troubled smile and pointed at David.
"David used to say terrible things to me when I was suffering back then. It was around the time before he married you, I believe. He was still living at home, and he would say things like 'Hurry up and make dinner,' 'How long will you sleep?' 'You're the mother,' 'Stop pretending to be sick,' and such unkind words."
Barbara's face looked pained, as if recalling those difficult times.
"Is that true?"
I asked David, wanting to believe in him. He awkwardly turned his face away without denying anything, indicating that what Barbara said was true. Barbara looked down painfully and said, "My late husband, David's father, got angry at David's behavior back then and hit him. When he was severely scolded by his father, David said the exact same thing, that he had a wake-up call. Indeed, after that, David stopped saying anything to me. That's because he soon married you and moved out. But Linda, he treated you badly, didn't he? So, David hasn't changed at all. Even after decades, he has no understanding of someone else's illness." She spoke calmly, dismissing David's words as mere excuses.
"No way! Just wait a minute, I won't do it anymore, believe me."
David tried to intervene, but Emily grabbed his arm to stop him. "I saw it back then too. That's why I hit you like Dad did. Remember, after Dad scolded you, you were crying and apologized to Mom, saying you wouldn't do it again, that you had a wake-up call, and that it was your fault. But now, you're doing the same thing to Linda that you did to Mom. Asking to be believed after doing the same thing twice is just too convenient. There's no way we can believe you," Emily admonished, and David bit his lip in frustration. As he fell silent, Barbara grabbed my shoulders and said, "That's why you need to divorce David and escape quickly. Otherwise, you'll continue to suffer. Now, with my daughter and me here, is your chance. If it's just the two of you, he'll never admit his faults. He might even get angry at you for embarrassing him in front of his parents." I felt sad to hear such words from his own mother. The thought of divorcing at this age was daunting, but hearing Barbara's story made me feel like I couldn't go on with David. I had endured his treatment, believing that once my symptoms eased, we could return to living happily as before. But it would likely just be a brief respite before things got worse again. I also felt rising anger at learning David had verbally abused Barbara in the past. Suppressing my ongoing dizziness, I stood up and, looking straight at David, expressed my intention to divorce. David shook off Emily's hand and shouted, "What, so everyone's against me now?" Everyone in the room looked at David with cold eyes. Faced with such gazes even from his family, David turned red with rage. "Fine, I get it. If that's what you all say, then I'll agree to the divorce," he said, angrily consenting to the divorce. The dinner party was cancelled, and Barbara and Emily went home. David stayed at a hotel. Our divorce proceeded without any dispute over property division and was finalized smoothly. Afterward, I focused on recuperating from my condition, living alone after separating from David. About half a year later, I received a call from David, whom I hadn't been in contact with at all. Since leaving him, I had moved into an apartment and was living alone, regularly visiting the hospital for my treatment. As expected, the call was filled with David's selfish demands. I had been feeling better recently without any stress, but the call from David gave me a bad feeling. He had a pre-existing condition that, according to him, worsened after our divorce and him living alone. Yet, David always boasted about perfectly managing his own health. He even used that to insult me when I was unwell, calling me lazy for not getting better sooner. Why did it get like this? You said you could manage your health perfectly, right? I retorted, although I knew the reason. David's idea of managing his health was shallow, just choosing what to eat from the meals I prepared, considering balance. He never had to cook from scratch because I always planned the meals with his health in mind. Moreover, since he never did any household chores, his living standards plummeted over the past 6 months. His diet consisted of convenience store meals and retorts, only showering, not cleaning, which inevitably led to his deteriorating health. I won't be able to live like this. That's why I want you to take care of me. It's been half a year, your illness must be cured by now, he said without any remorse. Apparently, he first turned to Emily and Barbara, but Emily was busy caring for Barbara and couldn't help. Reluctantly contacting me as a last resort, David pleaded. Though I wanted to refuse, he was, after all, my husband for many years. I thought of ignoring him, but David said, then at least come and look at the album I found in the closet. If you don't want it, I'll throw it away. I hesitated, thinking it might be old photos, including good times with David and Barbara's family. Despite being disillusioned now, our relationship was good back then, and there were photos with Barbara and Emily. I decided to go and pick out my part of the photos from our former home. The house we lived in until half a year ago was dirtier than before, possibly due to neglect. Empty convenience store meal containers were left on the table, making me frown involuntarily. Without you, I don't have time to clean. It's hard to move when I'm feeling unwell, David excused himself without being asked. He looked unexpectedly well, despite claiming to be unwell. Moreover, despite seeking care in anticipation of worsening health, what David really wanted was cleaning, laundry, and meal preparation. It seemed like he just wanted a housekeeper. After some hesitation, I replied, "You don't look injured and seem perfectly fine. Why don't you stop slacking off and take care of yourself?" At this, David narrowed his eyes displeasedly and retorted, "You know my illness affects my internal organs and nerves, right? Don't judge just by appearances. I'm really suffering, and you dare accuse me of slacking off." He spat those words out. I just stared at him coldly in response, and he started to stutter. Suddenly, David stopped. And, taking a deep breath,
I was wrong to say that to you when you were suffering. I'm truly sorry and have reflected deeply. I won't do it again, so please.
Before he could finish, I firmly declined.
Sorry, but I can't take care of you. I'm still dealing with menopause myself, and I can't trust your repentance.
Then, a desperate David clung to me, seemingly without any concern for how he appeared.
Please, I could be hospitalized at any time due to my worsening condition. Medication alone isn't enough, proper diet management is essential, and I'm in trouble without you. Please, I'm begging you.
While David seemed genuinely remorseful, I remembered what Barbara and Emily had told me about his past actions.
They say he only apologizes deeply when he wants to blame you for not forgiving him.
Recalling her words, I shook my head slowly. I was already overwhelmed with my own issues and not in a position to take care of someone else. If I went back to living with and caring for David, the stress would likely exacerbate my menopause symptoms again. I couldn't go back to square one after finally starting to feel better. It's impossible.
If you really need care, use a caregiving or helper service.
I told him, explaining these options. I made it clear again that I couldn't provide care and had no intention of living together in the future, then returned to my life. Later, as my symptoms settled, I resumed work after a long leave of absence. I started returning to work gradually. There was a time when I contemplated resigning, but now that I need to live on my own, I have to earn my living expenses independently. Additionally, having always found fulfillment in my job, despite the break of 2 years and a few months, I found it enjoyable once I started working again. I had no intention of reconciling with David or remarrying anyone else at the moment. However, I still kept in touch with David's family, occasionally meeting them for meals. I heard that the traditional family dinners, a long-standing custom in David's family, were discontinued after this incident. Furthermore, David apparently quit his job for reasons unknown. He claimed it was to focus on his treatment, but his visit frequency to the doctor and dietary habits hadn't changed. He had some savings from early retirement, so he seemed financially stable for the time being. Nevertheless, he appeared to be living in fear of an uncertain future due to his illness. As for me, I plan to continue cherishing my health and living a fulfilling life for the rest